back up. Tony, you sent me some slides and some random things, and Tim, you got your Epcot stuff. We're going to start with you two, and then Kim, I think we're going to have you back up for something too. So let's start with Tony and Tim.
I'll sit in the tiny demonstrator.
So we don't need it yet. You could.
Right side, please.
Yeah. Right, you got an inch here. Right there.
We're good right now.
Yeah. So the impetus for this is these gentlemen and everybody that sends stuff in, we have so much to go through. And, you know, as you heard the one with Tony, we were talking about like, oh, we got to go over the land. So we wish we had the time for it. So there we go. So you had sent a number of different things in that you wanted to share with the folks. So we'll just go right through them.
Yeah, so way before Seas was a thing called Discovery Bay. Has anyone heard about that? One of the cool things that we were going to have in that is you were going to be able to dine underwater. So, but I don't know if I worked there, I'd probably get tired of listening to the concert of Toccata and Fugue on that orbit. It sure looked like a fun place to go back and eat us again and again and again, which is again what I like to try and find. So that was one element, but going even further back, are we going to that next slide?
Yeah.
Yeah, so actually my beginning with the Walt Disney Company was, I was assisting Claude Coates and another fellow named Dave Burkhart, and after I'd been I was like 22, and I'd been there for like a year and whatever, and I went down to Walt Disney World in April of 71, a weekend after the big Northridge earthquake, and I thought, I'm gonna die and I'm not gonna get to travel, because I'd never been out of California, and so they handed me this whole lagoon. Nobody down here, in terms of the contractor trades, was skilled in doing art stuff. They were building condos, so they said, try to teach them how to do a whole underwater garden thing. And I love my expression sitting there talking to Fred, who's actually someone who came down here from California. And I said, how are we gonna do this? It was like looking at, you know, it might as well have been 5 acres. It probably was. And turn it into a coral reef. So that was another very early introduction to water. And believe me, once we filled that lagoon, getting to do a little snorkeling in it and stuff was pretty cool, you know? Yeah.
Now I know your love of water and your love of the Nautilus too.
So Kim is in this one. This was again that very early first pass at trying to find out if we could do something like this. And we went down, I think this is at Johnson & Johnson's oceanographic facility down by Miami. You can talk more on that. But this was me, Kim, and John Olson, and then Kim, who's the guy in the black jacket there, do you know? Okay.
His first name was probably not actually Hap.
Okay.
But he owned this small offshoot of Johnson & Johnson's Sea Lab, you know, their laboratory, and I don't remember.
And then I can't remember that blue guy. The guy in blue was the filmmaker for us. So anyway, that was the beginning of that. But up in the other corner, my obsession is two things: the movie Sleeping Beauty and Harper Goff's Nautilus. And I built one of those kind of in the middle, not the biggest one, but the one in front of the bigger one. And then, of course, as soon as I got it done, they sell them, you know, like so. And they sell them from small to large. So you buy the small one, and then next year they come out with a larger one. And the next one has an interior that lights up, and I have to buy that, and I have to buy that. So it's become idiotic, but it kind of put me again in the framework of who are we going to send down there to paint all those plastic boats that came out of the factory just in pure green. So on the next slide, you can see there I was at 22 telling house painters how to age a submarine, you know, and make it look like it was all rusted. So that was quite an opening. And then, am I supposed to keep going like this?
Yeah, this
okay.
is perfect.
All right.
Anything goes.
So, and it keeps on going. When they closed the submarine ride at Disneyland, and they'd also already closed this one, I remember a person who shall not be named came along and said, "Isn't this an exciting day? We've got the Navy band here to celebrate the closing of the ride. We're selling submarine sandwiches in the cafeteria. This is like a great day." And I said, "This is one of the worst days I've ever vow to you now, before I quit this company, this ride is going to reopen. And you can see our team there, as well as having Andrew and John, and they actually turned the monorail into a submarine back behind us. It was an amazing day, and if that person who was saying it 9 years before was still there, I think I would have given a salute, but it would not be the kind of salute that would be proper. Right. And then Kim was heavily involved in this too. This is the city of Long Beach, and it's the first look at what would eventually become Tokyo Disney Sea, but it's called Long Beach Disney Sea. And he had to go up against the Coastal Commission and God knows all the people that have their fingers in the pot on trying to do something along the California coast. And even though we bought the Queen Mary and we had a lot of entitlements, it just became so burdensome. But like every good thing at Disneyland, if you look really closely at this rendering, you'll see a lot of those things like the volcano in the back and everything that eventually found a home, but you have to cross the Pacific Ocean to get to it. Yeah, so, and then the last one, I did this when I was a kid at Disney. And it was because there was a moment in time where they said, we were working on Epcot, and I avoided working on the Switzerland pavilion because it didn't look interesting to me. And Marty says, well, let's just go and figure out something for Disneyland's future until we come up with something more for you to do. And so I was in my office doing this, and then Marty brings in Dick Nunes, and I didn't know what was going on. He says, so Tony is going to show you the plans for Disneyland's future right now. Aren't you, Tony? And like, I had to go from, here's an idea that I'm thinking about, to, yes, we're going to have an aerial monorail type ride that's in this dirigible, and you're going to be able to go on the Nautilus and have a dinner, and then for about 3 or 4 years, it became the future of Disneyland. You know, so that was amazing. So that's my little contribution to this run and go thing.
It's great. It's great.
So,
Tim, you know your slides best.
Yeah,
and I should have given this to you for the season. I'm just,
I want to thank Tony for.
Yeah, it's the green button.
The green
The big one. Yep.
I want to thank Tony for putting the Hyperion in that, because I just stole it for him for Disneyland Paris because it's such a good icon.
I gotta say though, see, this was when the people like Ron Miller knew that they had made a stinker movie, and so they wouldn't hear of spending any more money on that. That's why that went down. But by the time Tim came along, Michael Eisner, they didn't know what island at the top of the world is, and he goes, wow, that is such a cool, yeah, that what a great thing.
Well, the other thing that I took advantage of is when you're in Disneyland Paris and you're walking through Eddie Sato's unbelievably fabulous Main Street, as you look and you're looking at the castle, you shift to the right and you see the Hyperion, which leads you right into Discoveryland. So we're connecting the dots. So anyway, so I'm going to move forward. I'm going to go really quickly through this. Before there was an Epcot, there was a Tomorrowland. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life story, and it all started when I was very young. There was this guy by the name of Walt Disney who produced this television show called Man in Space, and it was really produced and directed by Ward Kimball. And when I was, great show. It was fabulous. And when I was a wee kid, I think I was about 6 or 7 years old, I saw this show on Ward Kimball there. 20 years later, I was working with him on the GM project. But the last segment of it, and everybody here has probably seen it, but I'm just telling you the impact it had on me. It was this like last 12-minute of animation, like this beautiful Max Fleischer kind of animation, and it's just so magnificent. And it launches you, goes into outer space. You've all seen it. And then when this heroic music comes in and this craft lands, this aircraft lands, or the spacecraft lands, I mean, I was completely blown away, and I became a Tomorrowland kid forever, And I will say, and I've said this on podcasts before, but it means so much to me. I turned to my parents, I said, is this true? Have we been to outer space? And my mother said something I'll never forget. She said, no, I think Mr. Disney just made this up. And I said, just made it up. And I actually took that and I just started drawing rocket ships and Tomorrowland and all that stuff forever. And then I went to Disneyland. I grew up in, I was born and raised in Glendale, just like, Russell said that. And so we would go to Disneyland. And this is my first trip to Disneyland in August of 1956. I was there with my family. I had this picture you see, the four of us on Main Street at Center Street, my brother and myself, my mom, my sister there. If you can look at it really closely, our faces don't look like we're at the happiest place on earth. For some reason we didn't. But I'm thrilled with this picture. Me and my brother, he's 3 years older than me, on the rocket jets. I'm with my, it's so funny, I was looking at somebody else had some early pictures of, I think somebody in 55. And my mother is wearing a hat. I think she had gloves on. You know, this is what you did when you went to Disneyland. And I had this shot in front of me, in front of Tomorrowland, and you can see the rocket back. For some inexplicable reason, I don't know how I can say this, but if you put me in the hub, with the castle in front of me and Frontierland, Adventureland, and all that, there would be a magnetic pull for me right into Tomorrowland. I don't know why. It just really not. So it helped me like draw rocket ships and futuristic things and all that forever. So it's interesting because this is what it looked like from the air, and there wasn't much there. But you know, I love that Aerosaturn kind of architecture, the right flight to the moon. It was just fantastic, right? So what I'm going to do is now I'm just going to go through a whole series of concept sketches. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, here. So again, I started in 1976 in Imagineering in the graphics department. Ernie Prince-Horn was the head of the graphics department, and he was the instructor of mine at Art Center. And after I was out of Art Center, 5 years later, he called me and wanted to know if I wanted to work there. So I started working in Imagineering, and I started working, as I said, in the graphics department, doing a lot of illustrations and mostly, you know, corporate alliance kind of things and all that. But these gentlemen, what would we call the old group or whatever, but I mean, Mark Davis, Herbie Ryman, Colin, Sam McKim, it was truly a pleasure to work with these individuals. It was just, and to learn from them. It was extraordinary. I'll take one more diversion, just 1 second. So the first year that I was working there, I spent every available moment, whether it was lunchtime or those 2 breaks we used to take, and 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, and I walked through every department throughout all of Imagineering, or WED at the time, and I knew everything that was going on. I introduced myself to people, and it was just a magical place. So I spent that next year working on it, because there was this whole Epcot thing coming. It was a rumor of Epcot coming. So it was going to be exciting. And I thought, I'm going to go home, and I worked every night on our portfolio. And so at the end of the year, I went to my boss, Ernie, and I said, Ernie, I think I can do something more for the company. I'd like to show my portfolio to John Minch and Marty Sklar. So he said, yeah, okay. So I did, and I made this presentation to them. I went into Edie's conference room, showed my portfolio, and I'm looking at Marty, and he looks at me like, don't you already work here? And I said, I do, but I think I could do, because I was doing all this futuristic stuff, right? So about 3 weeks later, I come back into work on a Monday morning, and Ernie says, I'm gonna have to let you go. So I said, okay, and we were working on Space Mountain for Disneyland at the time. I took all these space paintings off my wall, walked into Johnny Cure Jr.'s office, and I said, they've just let me go. They let me go, gave me 2 weeks severance pay, hired me back a week later, and put me right around the corner from Tony Baxter and Herb Ryman. And I worked at it, I fought for it, but when you're young, you don't really know how to take chances. And it was the thing that really just, I'm glad I did. And it changed everything in my life. We were starting Epcot. Here was that kind of roster of all the people working in the creative department, and half of them were like, there's the librarian there. We were it was such an amazing project, Epcot, the vision of it, and I'm not sure that we were really prepared for it. So I also had the opportunity to come down here with all the art directors that Disney had hired, Charles Martin Smith, Boris Levin, Bob Clatworthy, all of these guys, William Tyler, all that stuff. So we came down, flew on the mouse, And this is a picture of me standing in front of Spaceship Earth. Norm Jurgensen's down here. Behind me, about 100 feet, was a little stick with a little ribbon on it, you know, and this is what it looked like. So I mean, I love all these classic things. So basically what I was asked to do, and I was working with Johnny Good Jr., it was really great. You know, I was kind of like a short order cook, a short order artist, and I just cranked these things out. I probably did 150 of these in, you know, a year and a half. In this particular case, I've always been able, they would just show me a drawing and I could just draw it, and that's what I did, right? But I was having a problem because these drawings are really big. We had no way of actually enlarging things at that time. So Herbie, right around the corner, would come in and I'd say, how do I get any impact here? And I will tell you that what the sketches you're gonna see, none of them ever got finished because they would say, like, you do this, and then forget that. We done that yesterday, we're gonna do something else, we'd throw it away. Herbie said, I want you to go down to the maintenance department. Don't go to the model shop, go to the maintenance department, get the widest brush you can get. And when you get that wide brush, you just take your brush, and everyone remembers the way Herbie used to paint, but he would just say, take that brush and just make these big shapes. And suddenly, and then you just paint all the little parts in between. so that's what I did, you know, and I did a whole series of these things. I'd actually kind of like test things, and I would like push everyone underneath the ball, and Hinch would say, you can't do that, that's impossible to do. People don't like to make decisions. They want to go right or left or something. And about 3 weeks later, I saw sketches where we're going through the building. So, you know, you never know how you impact things. What I learned in that Man in Space program is the power of an idea and the power of creating a vision. Because people, when they see things, if it registers, clicks with them, sounds right, suddenly they believe it's possible to do. And that was the big takeaway that Man in Space program is all about. So, I mean, you all know what this looks like. This shot here is looking past Spaceship Earth when that big white structure is going to be American Adventure, you know, if you remember that. Yeah, the first one. It was before you got to World Showcase. So again, this is one like, hey, we'll give this a try. I do this painting, and then like, put it aside, we're gonna do something else. There's another version of it, just trying to show. And this was, and again, when you're doing pure concept work, nothing's really worked out, but you just have to visualize. I mean, this is what I did, is just visualize it, put it in fast, move on, you know, you don't really finish it. And learning how to paint loosely, I learned from Herbrand. He was just a master of it. The difference happens to be when I would paint all the way down my sleeve. Herbie would paint in a black velvet jacket, you know, he was extraordinary. This is another thing that I think, when Johnny Q Jr. said, oh, we should do something like this, I'm thinking, this is fantastic. This would be a fantastic idea today when big screens are available. Since they didn't exist in 1980, you know, it was like, okay. Some land pavilion stuff. Again, I'm just gonna go through random things. This is when I worked with Ward Kimball on that ending scene for A World of Motion, right? Yeah, this was just like a real fog bank, and I was like big into airbrush and say like, well, just kind of make it splashy. These were also really done for participants, you know, like sometimes there was no design. What I was actually doing, I was actually creating images of design, images of ideas. It wasn't really designed. It was just like, get something out there. This was for the World of Motion post-show for General Motors. I did these drawings, and I did like 8 of them. And again, there's really nothing in them because we didn't know what it was going to be, but you just have to make the art itself kind of flashy. You know, that's just what you had to do. And I ended up doing the presentation to Roger Smith on this. This is one of their car displays. We didn't know what the future was going to be, but you know, I just made it splashy.
What did Roger Smith say?
Pardon me?
What did Roger Smith say to you?
Take my money. He ended up doing that. I really would love to tell you about the GM thing, but I know I'm going to run out of time. But maybe another time. But he was like, you know, he's a very nice man. You know, he like just wanted to sell cars. I mean, that was really amazing. We were doing Communicore, and nobody knew what Communicore is. So I think I talked to, you know, they said, well, just create something called the, you know, travel port, you know, so it was like a combination thing. A lot of these things were just promotional things to get into sponsors' hands, just so they could say, this futuristic Epcot experience is happening. This was going to be a computer show. This was my version of Zoom, but I was using a Pepper's Ghost for people to be in a conference room, and I think they may have used this idea for something, the computer show or something like that, you know, it's just, and again, I have no idea if we could do this, but I just, you know, you got a brain, I mean, you have an idea, you've got paint boards and they're paying you, crank out ideas, just go for it, you know. I do not know why I did this. I have no idea. I don't know who asked me. I do not know any idea. I had more of a feeling about the next thing, which was kind of the direction that I was given is, we want to do something that's for Kodak, and you just make it colorful. So, like, okay, that's what you do. These are really early. Believe me, this is what we do. I did a whole series of things for the University of Energy, big screen stuff, just big space paintings. This one was an idea that I was pitching to John and Marty about, like, you know, instead of all this architecture, why don't we just make more of a garden out here? Because gardens and trees are timeless. Well, that did not go over well at all. This was a space pavilion that I wanted to create some kinetic energy. Like, I always like to create kinetic energy in all of our parks. There's a really quick George Lucas story I could tell you here. One day I called, this was in 1978, notice from Marty saying, we have a meeting tomorrow, John Hench, Marty, a guy with the name of Gene Johnson, and myself. You know, we're gonna meet down at John Hench's office. George Lucas is coming in, and we're gonna talk to him about a space pavilion. So George comes in, and George is very, you know, very kind of quiet guy. Marty talked to him about Epcot, what it was gonna be. John Hench was giving George suggestions on Star Wars, which, okay, good. So George was really nice, and kind of, it wasn't this idea, it was just anything in general about radiating space. And so George kind of pipes up at the end. It was a very short meeting, maybe 45 minutes, and George says, well, I think this is really interesting. However, I think if you want to end a really nice Epcot pavilion, great, in a space pavilion, you must meet an alien. And I'm sitting there going, don't say that, George, because this is not what we're going to end up doing. You know, but it was interesting. Part two of this story, the next day I'm going to fly to San Francisco. And I go to the Burbank airport, 5 o'clock. There's George standing against the wall. And we kind of give that bro like, hey, dude, how are you? So I went over and talked to him, and I said, so what do you think of the meeting? He thought it was really good and all that. And then, you know, because we all in Imagineering just loved Star Wars. Everyone was crazy. In our lunchtime events, or at lunchtime times, you know, we'd be sitting around, and there were so many Imagineers who would say, like, you know, we're mad at Disney because they could have gotten Star Wars and they didn't do it and all that. So, going to this meeting, we're getting on the airplane, and I say, George, can I sit next to you? And I say, can I talk with you? And he goes, sure. And I didn't really bug him. So he told me, well, you know, I'm buying all this land up in Marin County. I have no idea what I'm going to do with it. So I said, oh, okay. So the next thing I said, I have a question for you. Did you bring Star Wars to Disney? And he said, yes and no. He says, I already had the deal. I already had the deal with 20th Century Fox, but I brought it to them. And the reason I did is because of my dedication, my devotion to Walt Disney. And he rattled off the movies that had an impact on him. And that whole fun family thing, he attributes a lot of it to Walt Disney and his background. So that's what launched a lot of those things. This was the Space Pavilion that I painted that was done for John DeCure Sr. And this was an interesting project in a sense that there was a vertical circle vision. Like vertical circle vision. Like, okay, all right, we'll see. So I finished this painting. This painting is about 5 feet across. So what happened is, and this is what it would look on the inside, and the audience would be facing one another with this vertical circle vision. The day after this, I get this call saying, will you come down to Disneyland? There's a whole group of people coming down. We're going to look at the Circle Vision film. Come at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I go down, sure, I'll be happy to go down there. And there's a whole bunch of people in Tomorrowland. and Ron Miller was there. And they had put a star field in the Circle Vision Theater. So how are we gonna look at this? They go, well, we want you to all lay on the handrails. And I'm looking across, and right next to me is Ron Miller, all 6'5" of him. And every person who thought it was a good idea, and every person in that group who thought that was not a good idea, was absolutely confirmed. Whatever they believed, they confirmed it. Those who thought it was a good idea, see, what did I tell you, it was a good idea. The other people said, no, it wasn't a good idea. And we never did do it, but it was a really interesting day for me in terms of seeing what ideas and how ideas and who tested them, and it was extraordinary. This was a whole bunch of sketches for a post-show, space show. This was a whole thing about adding more activities to Epcot Center. And then this is the last shot really fast. I wanted Georgia Pacific wanted to come into Walt Disney World and do a sponsorship of an attraction, and they wanted a dedicated attraction to themselves. So, I love the Monsanto, ride, and I wanted to put the Mighty Microscope in, and we were going to use the Energy Pavilion. They said, go ahead and do it, but, they just couldn't work out the deal. So, but anyway, I just couldn't help but doing it. This came out later. This was way back in 2008 or something like that. But anyway, this is just a random group of things that, that I was asked to do, throw ideas out there, create a vision of them, and this is a lot of time how just everything and ideas get off the ground and how we have a tendency to work. So I think that may be the last thing. There you go.
Can we get you up here for this last one? Because we want to talk a little bit about your environmental work with the company.
All right, put it in the side.
We're good. You're there. That's how we're good. All right. I get the little chair. Out here, we'll just throw it nice one. So, yeah. So, after all of these adventures, building the Living Seas, you got a position in 1990 that was kind of cool, right?
Why, yes, it was. Well, it was not only cool for me. My wife, Linda, who I wish was here today to keep Kelly company. I was sitting in our house. We were Glendalians like Timothy here. And I was scratching our dog or something meaningful. And I saw Linda answer the phone, and I saw her face kind of go whitish, and she said, Kim, it's Michael and Frank. Oh, it is Michael and Frank. I could see her face. And so I walked over there, and I took the phone, and Frank Wells said, Kim, can you be at my house in the next 45 minutes? Sure, Frank, yeah. Okay, click. And I went, oh my gosh, how can this be good? And so I hopped on my Honda 50, which I bought from Tim, and off I went to Beverly Hills, wherever Frank's house was, and there they were. And Frank said, you have a new job, and you are now our environmental officer, for the corporation. You're going to represent us environmentally. You're going to get us back in shape. We had been fined at the time. Disneyland had been fined for a hazardous waste hauling violation. And of course, people said, how can Disneyland have hazardous waste? Just didn't make any sense. And Walt Disney World had been fined for golf course design violations and so forth. So we've been fined about $2.5 million, which for our country was by far the largest fines we've received. And this was in the days of Superfund sites and so forth. And so I said, sure, and so I went to Frank's office, and I was going to I really had to hand it to them the way they were going to do this, because I had no idea what I was going to do, but they wanted me to report directly to them, to Michael and Frank, to them, so that there would be no, I wouldn't have to go through the slings and arrows of, outrageous environmental decisions before the decisions were actually made. They knew if I didn't report to them, Frank knew this more than anyone, that it never would get to him right. It would get to him in a filtered version, whatever the problem was. So Frank envisioned me, what he would have done was a command and control, swagger stick, cut people's bonuses, fire, send them to Siberia, that sort of approach. So I'm in a way thinking that, and that really wasn't my personality. So I got back to him and I said, well, listen, Frank, here's my idea, why don't we try this? I'd like to go into each division, each one of our significant areas of activity, and bring some of their people into the process to make the decisions, to work on solutions, and we would work together with a strong dotted line to me, and not death sentences. I think that's just going a little too far. So he said, well, go ahead and try this. Well, what happened was, here around the world, and throughout our country and so forth, every one of our divisions had environmental affairs teams, which ranged from 4, 5, 6 people to 30 or 40 people, and they bought in. They became part of the solution. They became part of the process. So instead of these divisions hating environmental, my area, we were all together. We were a team. And it was extraordinary because they were excited about making things work, making things right. We won awards. We became the darlings of the government. We worked with, the obvious things like Department of Interior and so forth, but Department of Energy and EPA of all groups. And suddenly, it really worked. So for me, that was a 10-year period that was really meaningful. It wasn't as exciting. Well, it was exciting one time when I was almost fired. In fact, I thought I was fired. That was very exciting. Yeah, my wife was so thrilled when I came home that day. And though we did have one of those hanging hammocks, which I slept in for 3 weeks. Remember that? Yeah. But anyway, Frank, he left that day that I was almost fired for, coming up with an idea that brought the Blizzard Beach and hotel resort area there, Blizzard Beach and a hotel and resort area there. So anyway, what I was suggesting brought those projects to a halt. And the next thing I knew, there was a meeting called at Frank and Michael's conference room, and they wanted me to come on in with a couple other people. And when I arrived there, all of the senior executives from Walt Disney World were there. And I went, uh-oh. And so what had happened is I was suggesting to them that the gopher tortoises, which are like our tortoises, well, we're in Florida, aren't we? Are we in Florida? Okay. California has the desert tortoise. Here we have the gopher tortoise. And on that property where the Blizzard Beach and that hotel.
I think it was this one, right? Or was it All Stars?
All-Star Resort.
Okay.
So there was, we were bringing like $25 to $30 million of work to a halt. And the idea was that we would go in and it's easy to collect them because here's a gopher tortoise hole in the ground. You dig a little hole further out and you put a 5-gallon bucket in and you stand back and wait for the not so brilliant gopher tortoise to come up and go into the bucket. So then they would collect the gopher tortoises, and we made a neat little gopher tortoise hotel where we would keep them, and it had hardware cloth under the dirt, and so they couldn't escape. And we were going to collect all these 272 gopher tortoises, along with indigo snakes and a blue-tailed skink or something. And then we were going to repatriate them into these properties once the projects were completed. Well, the word that Frank got was that Kim's idea was going to cost the company $20 million in order to accomplish this, which really kind of poo-pooed the project. But my idea, along with the people that were working with me on this, was a $2 million cost over 10 years, where we would do this in a whole variety of our projects. So it was really actually nominal to do this. But Frank didn't get that part of the story. He got the $20 million now part. And that's when he said, you know, Kim, I don't know, and this is with all these people, Judson Green, you know, Diana Morgan, and on. I don't know if you still have a job with this company. I'm so disappointed. I cannot believe that you would be so disloyal to her, blah, blah. And I had just turned pure white. And then he left, and he and Michael went to Tokyo and then on to Hong Kong. So 10 days went by and I didn't hear. In fact, if people saw me in the hallway, they just immediately. And then finally I got a call from Shari, who was Frank's gal, and she said, Frank would like to speak to you. And this was like, 2 weeks later. And I went in there and I sat, and he kind of let me sit there for a while, and he walked out and he had some papers, and sat in his couch, and I sat in the other people couch. And he looked up at me finally and he said, well, Kim, I want you to know that you did exactly what I wanted you to do in this job. And that is to have well, you shouldn't say that word in a group like this, but have the courage to hang in there and stick with it and think about it, because I wrote him after this all happened. I said, I wouldn't change a comma or a exclamation mark or anything in this, and so if I'm fired, I'm fired, but this is what I think we should do. And he said, he basically said, I received inappropriate information, and I've spoken to those people who will not be named at this gathering. And he gave me a raise and patted me on the back. And so there were a couple of moments like that, but that 10-year period, along with Imagineering, I could not in a million years have even imagined having the experiences that I've had with the Walt Disney Company. It's just been astonishing. And I have to say one thing about, both of these guys, it applies to both of them, because they're not, Tony certainly wasn't an atypical, Herbie Ryman kind of guy. He had his own artistic way about him. Tim is, an extraordinary artist, and both of them kind of took after what Tim was alluding to, and that was, as he would go by Herbie Ryman's office and some of these other offices, I'd see Tim down the hallway, and I'd see him with his brush, and he'd take that paper off, so those amazing renderings you saw, those dynamic pieces of art were one hand, one brush. It was, so then I knew I was in the right place.
It was those sounds that you just made.
Anyway, thank you very much.